Welcome, everybody. Mike Wilson here, the host of Stutter with Confidence. And I'm happy today to be joined by Bhupinder Purewal. And Bhupinder, if you would, for those that haven't met you, that don't know you or seen you online, would you tell people where you live and what you do?
Hi, my name is Bhupinder and I live in Coventry in England. I'm a primary school teacher and I also run a group in Coventry called Coventry Stammerers.
Nice. And is that a part of Stamma or is it its own separate thing?
Yeah, well, it started off as its own separate thing, but then Stammer got in touch with me and now like they offer like a support like with advertising the group and things. So yeah.
Awesome. That's awesome. Stamma is from everything I've ever heard, it's a very proactive organization as far as trying, doing what it can to reach out to folks who stutter, to get people support for the different, not sure if chapters is the word you guys use for them, but the different local groups, and also doing a great job with the media, reaching out to try to, spread awareness. And I know the BBC, I mean, I don't know how many of those you've heard, but I know they cover stammering a good bit actually on some of the BBC affiliates, from what I understand.
Yeah,
And
that's actually.
so I think there's more awareness in the UK, probably. I know there's still a lot of work to do, but it's probably more awareness from what I've seen in the UK than in other countries, certainly in America. A long way to go.
Wow, that's so interesting to like hear like that different perspective, because I guess for me it's always felt like there isn't really much, but then until I discovered Stammer, it felt like I just hadn't met any other stammerers, and it's like it felt like a lot of the research was going on in America, so it's really interesting to hear your perspective.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of universities obviously in America, and a lot of research universities. So there's definitely, on the professional level, there's a lot of work being done on stammering, no doubt, or stuttering as we call it over here. But as far as just general awareness, like the media, I very rarely see the media ever cover anything to do with stuttering in the US. I mean, if you Google it, of course, you can find a few, but just like living your life, it's super rare that I ever encounter anything. And President Biden, hasn't, I mean, he's certainly done some things in the past for spreading awareness, but it's not something that's very front and center. And I get the feeling that he doesn't want to be perceived as still having a stutter. John Hendrickson had written a really good article in the Atlantic on this back when he was candidate Biden running for the presidency. And the gist of John Hendrickson's article was the words that you just can't get President Biden to say, which is that he still has a stutter. And unfortunately, I think sometimes the media people confuse that for him not knowing what he wants to say. So I think this is my opinion, but from what I've, the experience of talking to probably thousands of folks who stutter, a lot of those misunderstandings become less when people know that we have a stutter. Right? Hey, has that been your experience? Yeah, the coming at, and what I saw from your video on Facebook, maybe in the last year or so, is when you've sort of come out of the closet with your stammer. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it as well. Like, in fact, so it kind of all started when I read a book called Out With It by Catherine Preston. it's just an incredible book about this lady's journey with stammering and how she was desperate to find a cure. And then at the end of the book, she comes to a point where she realizes that actually she doesn't need a cure for stammering and that there isn't really one anyway, but then she learns to accept herself. And it was just the perfect time for me to read a book like this, because I was really struggling with my stammer. I just started my teacher training course, and nobody there, like nobody at the university had ever had like a student, you know, who stammered, like a trainee who stammered. So I felt really isolated. The tutors at university were really concerned about me, and like concerned about how I'd find teaching, and like in my observations, when other teachers would observe me and mark me, I would become quite nervous and stammer a lot more, and it just felt like there just wasn't any support out there. And then I kind of felt like, is teaching even the right career for me? But it was only because I felt that when it was just me and the kids in the classroom, and like I felt such a sense of freedom with that, and that's why like I just stuck with the year. But when I read this book, I realized that like if I'd just been a bit more open about my stammer and try to like accept it more throughout the year and talk about it, I feel that it could have been like an easier journey for me, instead of like trying to hide it and then, you know, becoming upset when it was spoken about. But I think there just wasn't, I feel that people don't really know enough about stammering just in like the wider community. And like after that, in fact a year after that, I set up the group Coventry Stammerers, because I just hadn't met any other people who stammered like as an adult, and that's just been incredible. Like I've really felt that by meeting other stammerers, I felt a lot more normal and more accepted, and I just feel like more comfortable stammering than I ever did before, really.
And is it about, man, I think it's a variety of things is my guess, but do you think one of the big things is the reason getting together with others who stutter is so powerful is you're no longer all alone with that situation and with those experiences, right? And feelings and all that. And realizing that actually the way that we feel about it and have dealt with it, trying to hide it and being ashamed of it is sort of the default position many folks who stammer fall into, right? At some point, sort of, and it's very natural. It's a very normal way to, you know, we're an extremely social species, right? And this stammers, you know, that's where it exists, right? It's not. I want to compare conditions or disabilities, whatever word one wants to use there, but like, you know, if you're in a wheelchair, for example, that doesn't necessarily sit in the middle of your interactions or your conversations with other humans, right? It's a fact, you know, your legs are such that you need to be in a wheelchair, but you know, stammering, stuttering, really, well, as it's called, it's a speech impediment, and it sits in the middle of the real-time communication and us feeling like we can do the back and forth thing, and that can create a ton of shame. So would you say that getting together with people was a powerful tool to start to reduce your your shame and feeling like stuttering is not acceptable, and like every time you're stuttering, you're failing, you're screwing up. You say it adjusted some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I feel that when I'm talking to other people who stammer, yeah, it's exactly that sense of freedom. So when I first set up the group, it was just me and one other person. Her name is Lexis, and she, like, it was such a moment when I met her and she joined the group, and we had our first meeting, because for years and years, like since I was a child in speech therapy, I hadn't ever spoken to another stammerer. And it was just such, like, it just felt like a really big moment where, like, I felt like I could really open up and tell my story to someone who could really relate and hear her story. And she's lived such an incredible life. She's like really worked her way up in terms of her confidence and her career and everything. And it gave me so much confidence that, like, you can, like, stammer for your whole life and just still have a full life. And that was a concern of mine. I always felt like I had to get rid of it. Like, so for me, I always make lots of New Year's resolutions, and every year it will be right up there for me to use my techniques more and slow down and breathe, even though these things for me personally don't really work much. But I always felt that I needed to get rid of it to do well in my job, to just have a full life where I didn't feel embarrassed. But then talking to her made me realize that it's just not true at all. The reason why we feel like why we can't stammer and why kind of it's taking over our lives is because we don't see it enough. We don't see stammering in the media. We think it's not normal, and it's exactly what you were saying about how if you don't see something, you just don't feel like it's acceptable. And how, I think particularly because it really does kind of affect the flow of a conversation. It is a very different type of disability to have, because it's something that kind of can increase and then decrease at times. And I think it's just a really difficult thing to kind of get your head around, but it's something that really needs to be more accepted.
Yeah, I hear you. And so seeing or getting to know that person in the group with you, or group of two at the beginning, but I think that counts as a group. So that sort of gave you an example, like, wait a second, she's still stuttering, but she's done all these things, and she doesn't feel like a loser, basically, because of her stutter. She realizes that she's not a loser just because she stutters. And I think that a good argument can be made that for folks that have a good stutter going, as I prefer to call it, not a bad stutter like some people say, someone with a good stutter going that is still out there achieving and doing very positive things in the world is actually, I hate to say it, but maybe more impressive than the average person that's doing that same level of good things, right? Because it's not easy. It's a journey. And even when we were talking about before we started recording, even when you're feeling fine, sort of in your mind psychologically about your stutter, you're not carrying that deep shame anymore, and avoidance and embarrassment and all that. Stuttering's still challenging, just on the physical level. Battling through words, right? It tires you out. And that kind of is what it is. Or for a lot of people will use a lot of tricks. So they'll change their words a lot. They're always scanning the horizon, trying to figure out what they might stutter on and say something different. That's tiring as heck also, right? Sucks a lot of mental energy. And so stuttering is not easy, and it does take character and determination and all that. And it's people out there doing positive things and not letting it stop them. It's super impressive. And we all know it as people who stutter, because we know exactly what the experience is like and how challenging it is. And so that mentorship, that call it peer mentorship, if you will, right? It sounds like was a huge part, just realizing, wait a second, this is not the life-stopping event that I thought it was. I can still go out there and be myself and do what I want to do.
That's it. Exactly it. Like, I almost felt that I couldn't exist if I didn't stop stammering. I just felt that like there wasn't a place for me in the world. I felt like I couldn't get a good job, like I couldn't, have relationships and just things like that. I felt like it just wasn't possible for me to have a full life and continue stammering. And that's why I think it's really important that we see stammering more, that stammering's shown more in on TV, in books, in film, on social media. And yeah, like exactly as you were saying, like having that mentorship in the group was just incredible for me, and I think also for other people. So like it started off with just me and Alexis, and then the group's really grown. And at the time we'd just kind of come out of lockdown. Yeah. So we are the only kind of, well, one of the only groups, like in terms of stammer groups, who are meeting in person. And I think that because of that, I feel like our group kind of got a lot more momentum, because it can be really hard for stammerers to like have all of their meetings online and things, and we'd just kind of come out of that time where we'd all been at home doing meetings on Zoom and things like that. So it kind of became something where people would travel for, and people do, like just for our last meeting, we had people from Liverpool and from past London and all of that, and they've come all the way to Coventry to just have a coffee and a chat to other stammerers, because that sense of community is just so important. It makes you feel like you're a whole person, like there's nothing that you need to change or fix. And I always feel that like I'm more confident and I can really open up, like if ever I talk about stammering or I'm talking to other stammerers. Yeah,
I totally hear you. And that reminded me of a video that you had recently posted, and I forget which Facebook group it is, but so you made a video from I think the last meeting, right? You guys were like out at a restaurant or something, or a cafe, and you had mentioned on the, it was only, I don't know, maybe a 2-minute video or 3 minutes or something, but you had mentioned that one of the things you guys were talking about at that meeting was techniques versus no techniques. And I thought that's kind of a never-ending interesting conversation in the amongst folks who stutter. And I think well, one of your friends at the meeting, I think, was sort of on the other side of that conversation, so to speak. And just out of curiosity, what was the gist of that? And well, what's your perspective on no techniques? Is it that they don't really work anyway, and that you have to put a bunch of mental energy into it? And maybe they feel like you fail, like when they're not working, oh, I'm failing to use my technique, and that's sort of a shame, could be a shame inducing feeling. Is it those sort of things?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I feel like my thoughts on that have changed a lot, but I feel like now I really think that everyone's just got their own kind of way of dealing with their stammer, and everyone's got their own kind of, just their own way of dealing with that. But for me personally, I've always found that techniques don't work. So I've had a lot of speech therapy. I've had private and NHS sessions and hypnotherapy and even singing lessons, and I kind of felt that I was just trying everything to just get rid of my stammer. And I feel like if I'm charting my progress constantly and almost blaming myself for not using techniques all the time, for not slowing down, for not breathing deeply enough, then I just get really frustrated at myself, and I feel that a lot of other stammerers do, because then they feel that they've failed at something, that they haven't worked hard enough. And for so long I thought, I'm just not working hard enough. But having a stammer is not like getting fit and going to the gym or anything. It's a disability, and it's like how you were talking about, like how it's viewed so differently from other disabilities, like being in a wheelchair, because people see stammering as something that can be fixed, that can be got rid of if you use the right techniques and you do certain things. But I think it's just not a one size fits all thing, really. Like everyone has their own way of dealing with it, and in the group there, I've met people who who without techniques would not be able to talk, or they wouldn't feel confident enough to do things, to even go to work. So I think they really can help certain stammerers, but I think for other stammerers, it's just kind of, it's not very beneficial to your mental health to constantly be charting your progress and thinking, have I breathed in the right way? Am I talking slowly enough? Because just like fluent speakers, we want to talk freely and just have a natural conversation and just say things on the spur of the moment without constantly thinking, am I saying this correctly? Did I say that? Wow. So yeah, I think for me it was kind of, I think I just valued my mental health a lot, really. I think, and it's been a lot better for me to just completely accept it and think, this is how I talk and that's okay. And now whenever I teach, so particularly before I do the register at school, like I teach a lot of different classes, and I say, I've got a stammer, and I explain what a stammer is, and I ask the children if they've heard of the term stammering, and I think it can just create a really nice discussion point.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I will add that there is potentially a third way also, I think, right? And that third way is doing both of those, right? And I'm not saying anybody should do any one of these three, whatever people feel is best for them. Well, so I'll just talk about my journey. So for the first 18 years, well, when I became aware of it and started becoming very self-conscious about it, maybe when I was about 11. So from 11 to 18, I was, every time I stuttered, feeling like a total failure, just, and I really good stutter going. So I wasn't going to be able to talk without stuttering a lot. And so, and I did multiple speech therapies. And whenever I was stuttering, just felt like, you're screwing up, Mike, just shut up. It's better if you just not talk. And feeling like it was ruining my life, essentially. When I was 18, I got to college and got what I call eye contact training, where they brought me around campus at Florida State University and had me just, for the whole hour of therapy, it was just the therapist walking me around, the student therapist walking me around and saying, ask that person a question, ask that person a question, and learn to look them in the eye when you stutter. So rather than looking over here, look, look at people like that. And I found it was a game changer, that from a shame standpoint, I found out, wait a second, people will just sit there and listen. I can actually talk and stutter, and the vast majority of people will wait for me to finish. I figure out I got something going on, hard for me to speak, and they'll hang in there. And especially with eye contact, I found they'll hang in there even more. They know you're still talking. You're keeping that nonverbal communication still there. As Chris Constantino likes to point out, there's almost a powerful, and it sounds like an oxymoron, but there's a powerful vulnerability in that. And I know those sound like opposite words, but actually just being open and honest is powerful, right? And people can feel it, that you're not running away, you're not hiding in your closet right now. You're out there speaking to them and having a hard time, but you're still there and you're doing it, And if they listen, which most people will, find out, that you're making coherent, good points. So from age 18 until age 41, and I had done some additional speech therapy after that eye contact training for for like a year when I was going to dental school at NYU. I took some speech therapy, but again, it was the same everywhere that I ever did it. The techniques I learned never worked outside of the clinic. They always worked great with the therapist, but then they fall apart when you step out of the room, right? And after every session, I'd be like, this time it's going to be different because these techniques work. Look how easy I can talk to my friendly therapist. And you walk out and they'd fall apart. And so I just stopped doing any speech therapy after the age of 28 or 29. And I was like, you know what? Whatever. I'm just going to say what I want, and I'm not going to continue pouring mental energy into trying to use techniques that don't work at all. And I'm not going to evaluate my day based on how much I stuttered, because that's a surefire way for me to feel like crap, because I don't have control over how much that happens, right? And so that's what I did from age 29 to age 41. And I always had, though, in the back of my mind that I had never really given a Herculean effort, right? I had never really tried for example, and I don't think I've ever shared this on the podcast, but one thought I remember having, just sort of a curious thought in my head was, if this were a life or death situation, and, this were a movie, all right, and someone came along and said, Mike, you got 1 month to live if you don't get on top of your stutter, right? And so I had no choice but to just work my you-know-what off, total focus, total, for a month. What would happen, right? I didn't know. I had never put in that kind of effort. I mean, I had put in effort, but again, techniques fell apart when I walked out of the room. And I always had a sense that going out, like, to the malls, to the shops, and talking to anybody and everybody, using my technique, forcing my technique, quote, to the real world, probably would be the only hope, so to speak. And so again, that movie scenario, right? I just wonder what would happen? Like if I had a gun to my head, could I maybe do something? I don't know. And not that I was feeling ashamed about it, but like we said, it's not easy. Stuttering, it's not easy to battle through your words. Even if you feel fine about it, it's still physically tiring. And I remember a conversation with my 94-year-old grandfather for a couple hours, and he, did not have a stutter, and he was 94 and not in the best health, but he could sit back and talk and talk for 2 hours. I was exhausted after like 30 minutes of, because I was interviewing him for like an oral history sort of thing before he died. And, I still have those recordings. One of them's on the YouTube site, but yeah, so then at age 41, I found an approach I'd never tried, which I'm sure you've heard of this because it's pretty big in the UK, the coastal breathing that Starfish does and that McGuire does, right? And as you've probably encountered, there's quite a few people that have done those programs that really swear by it, right? Like, this is the best one I've ever done, And so I got that coastal breathing training, and it's a whole thing. You go out and do contacts, a lot of contacts when you talk to people. You also do the tell people that you stutter thing, right? So not trying to hide it. And so that certainly made a big impact on my stutter. But I really embrace the, as I like to call it, radical honesty idea. You can't use this technique to hide your stutter from people. That's not going to work, right? Trying to pass as a fluent person. That mentality is poison. I don't want to say for everybody because nothing's universal, but for the most part, my experience, that mentality is poison for us to have any hope of using any approach, right? If we're feeling pressure to be, quote, normal and fluent, then that's just too much. That just doesn't work. We have to, if we're using the technique, and voluntary stuttering is another, is another term for this, intentional disfluency. But if we're using a technique to show people I am not a normal fluent speaker, and please do not confuse me with one, that's a third way, I think, right? I'm not endorsing any particular approach, and I've had, nothing is even close to a cure. I don't think, for sure. There is no cure. But that is potentially a third way for some people. And so that's some of the conversation, because I think from what I saw, one of the folks that you were having that conversation with at the meeting had gone to Starfish, right? Am I correct?
That's right. Yeah, but no, it's really interesting what you were saying, and like I think that third approach is actually really important. That idea of being open about your stammer, but trying to help yourself to continue a conversation, and it's something that actually I haven't given a lot of thought to, but now I think about it, like, so for me, I've got a real problem with small talk, and like if ever I'm in the staff room, I do hide away a bit. I do get embarrassed if I stammer, like, especially in front of a lot of other teachers. But I get through those stammer openly. But it can be like a challenge, and as you say, it can be exhausting. So it's that idea of just trying to do things to just help yourself, and actually that does make a lot of sense. Yeah.
Right, and to really have that mentality of just sort of proclaim it from the rooftops, right? And hey, if and you don't have to like corner people for 30-minute conversations per se, but just sort of that. Well, again, the coming out of the closet, and yeah, and certainly I don't think anybody that stammers is against struggling a little bit less, right? Yeah. Right. It's Yeah, and I find this an endlessly interesting subject. And I don't think it's talked about that much, that third way, really. Although I will say, something like voluntary stuttering, this has been around a long time. Like Charles Van Riper and Joseph Sheehan, 40 to, I don't know, like 90 years ago or something, were certainly using voluntary stuttering, and that just being open and honest. So it's not a brand new idea, but it's not talked about that often. You hear a lot in the stuttering world, I'm sure, as you've noticed. You hear a lot of one camp or the other, right? Like a lot of people like, you can fix it. Look at this person, look at that person. You just got to do this. Now there's 50 different opinions on what this is, but maybe more than 50. Or the other camp is like, you can't do anything about it. Just, all there is acceptance, and there's nothing else. And again, I'm not saying people can do what they want. I'm not, I think the acceptance route, in my opinion, acceptance needs to be a part of it, a central part of the journey for people to really make progress beyond that shame and, evaluating their life based on whether they're stuttering or not, which is, I think, a pretty miserable way to live. But sort of, and I like to think of it as a sport. If we see it sort of as a sport, now keep in mind, there's never been a perfect athlete, right? The greatest athlete in any sport didn't, make the shot every time, say in basketball, or win the game every time. So I think it's a decent analogy, stuttering, or being a person that stutters, if indeed you're trying to work on some approach so you don't have to struggle as much, to think of it like a sport, because you're gonna miss shots, you're gonna stutter, you're gonna have challenging days, and you're not failing when you do those things. That's a part of this stuttering, stammering thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. And I think something I've realized, like by being part of the stammering community, is that like there is no like one camp like acceptance fully, or fixing it. Like I think everyone just has their own personal approach, and like for me that's something I've really learned. But for me personally, what I found really helped was just fully accepting it. And then I think after a certain point, like if someone feels that, as you were talking about before, they're just getting exhausted by stammering, then definitely, start to have like another approach as well, something to help you. Because I think that's something I've also realized, that it can be really exhausting, and sometimes you don't always want to stammer and talk about your stammer. But for me, like in those moments where I've been awkward about it and I've had to talk about it, or I've had to stammer in front of lots of people, I've kind of come back from that feeling good that I didn't blame myself for not using a technique, or for stammering at all. Because for me, like I felt like for a significant proportion of my life, I was always like, straight after I stammered, I'd always feel guilt, and guilt was such a massive feeling for me. And I'd dig my nails in my hand, like, oh, I should not have done that massive stammer. So for me, acceptance is about kind of just taking off that blame, and just thinking, this is me, and I might not always like that all the time, but at least I didn't feel kind of badly about myself when I stammer in an awkward situation, or you know, I do a really long stammer, it's like, it's not my fault, and I can move on from that mentally. But yeah, and it was also interesting hearing you talking about that 30-day, I mean, that a month like Herculean effort, because gosh, that, I think, I can't even remember where I read it, but I think about my dad told me that if you do something for 30 days, it becomes a habit. And I just thought, oh gosh, I need to do something now for 30 days. And just before I started my teacher training course, I got a part-time job just for the summer at at Wilco, and I literally did like every day I tried to use a new technique, or to use like the same technique and breathe and talk slower or change my voice. And perhaps it was because I wasn't sticking to a particular technique, just trying everything. But for me, like, I just felt more and more frustrated the more I tried. Yeah, that was just kind of like my personal experience.
Right, right. Like throwing things against the wall. Like, well, I tried that yesterday, didn't go so well. Let me try this and then that. Yeah, that's yeah. I mean, and that's really. I mean, I had that experience also. Tried everything from the speech easy thing, you know, the auditory delayed auditory feedback, to belly breathing, to talking on a metronome like that, to
Oh my goodness,
easy,
yeah.
that's easy onset, like amplitude contour, where you talk like, so you're raising your amplitude in the vowel and then hitting the consonants really light, and making, you know, that whole thing. I mean, I've been trained on all of it, for the vast majority of it. And again, none of them for me held up much outside of the clinical setting. Um, yeah, so that's no way to live for sure, right? We need a well, and you see that for another, getting back to the movie genre, right? You see that with actors. One example, the movie on Johnny Cash. I'm getting the name of it now, but Johnny Cash, you know, and his wife June Cash, who was a big part of his life in that movie. So Reese Witherspoon played June Cash. I think I'm getting all these details right. And from what I read, so she had to sing a lot for that role, right? She had to be June Cash and sing in the movie, sing well, sing like June Cash. And it was maybe after 4 months of her getting intensive training, right, from someone that really knew how to train somebody to sing well, and she had been working hard, and she still wasn't getting to a singing point where she was going to be able to do that role. And they were actually getting nervous, you know, the director and people were getting nervous that they were going to have to find another actress because she wasn't getting, you know, and she, you know, she just kept grinding, and she went another, I think, 2 or 3 months, and finally, after just a ridiculous amount of work, something clicked. You know? And but I'm sure there's other instances in movie history where, you know, the person wasn't able to do the role. But you see that for some movies where actors or actresses just have to get in a bubble for months and just completely focus on that. Like Val Kilmer played Jim Morrison's another one. And you know, I mean, they don't just get that. They have to put in a bunch of time and effort. And so, yeah, so yeah, so that's what I had wondered, right? What if this were a movie situation, right? And you got a, you know, $40 million paycheck. It's either going to come or not come based on whether you get this character, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah, and so I definitely just continuing forward with my journey and sort of put it out there for people watching. So I got a big bump in control and enthusiasm and all that, and was in a ton of control, other than a couple little instances where I was able to, you know, quickly get my confidence back on those particular words for basically 3 years. So I went from having a great stutter, so to speak, for the first 41 years to having a ton of control, and the kind of control largely that you're seeing on this podcast. But in situations outside now of even speaking to people that stutter in the last, I don't know, 6 months or so, the stutter has crept back in more and more in real life situations. And so I'm at an interesting point right now in my journey. I still have certainly more control than I had before, but there, from a mentality standpoint, it's at an interesting point, right? Because I don't want to. It's dangerous from our mentality, from the mental health perspective, if you want to say that, or just sort of how we feel about ourselves, to evaluate ourselves based on how well we're executing this technique that we use. Right now, I've gotten, again, of all the techniques I've ever used, this one for me has been 1,000 times better than any other I've ever used. So, I know for a fact that for myself, and having seen a lot of other people trained on it, I want to say fact because it hasn't been peer reviewed, published, and all that kind of stuff. You're not supposed to say that in the modern world. From what I've seen, this is by far the best technique that's out there, but still not a silver bullet. And most people didn't get the years worth of total control of speech out of this technique that I got. And so now I'm at an interesting point, right, where it's like, it doesn't seem to be working as well as it was. I have still been working pretty darn hard. I'm still, and having practiced it for years, it's not that hard for me to continue to practice it, to remember to use it. But it's not, it's certainly slipping in those real life situations. And there's also I'm trying to articulate this, but so the people in my life, even though I kept reminding them that I am not cured, that I am absolutely not cured, they kind of thought, I think, well, okay, he's saying that, but we don't see him stutter. We see him in total control of his speech now. So people must have probably thought that I sort of was, right? Or whatever you want to call it. Mike doesn't stutter anymore. He knows how to control it, And so now it's coming back a little bit, and I'm having to deal with those feelings of shame, if you will. Now, it's not running deep, and I'm not running away from those speaking situations. And I've got some other challenges in my life that I'm going through as well, like a divorce, which is an emotional, time for anybody, from what I hear, and so there's other stuff happening, right? And my hexagon, as John Harrison likes to call it, the stuttering hexagon. I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's it's our internal balance, is a very short way to explain it, if you will. When you're going through something difficult like a divorce, when I hear from others that have gone through it, it's normal for that to be a little disrupted, right? And it is, and that, as a person who stutters, that can impact our speech, right? We all know that stressful things can have an impact on it. So I'm at an interesting point where I don't know exactly what direction I want to take with it. I'm certainly going to give it another shot. I haven't been to an in-person course since the beginning of the pandemic. So I am going to stick with it because, I do prefer not to have to battle through a ton of words if I don't have to, at least not in mass, because that impacts my energy levels and all that. But you look like you had some things to say. I'll pass the baton to you.
No, yeah, I was just gonna say, I think having a stammer is it's such a singular thing, because our identities are just constantly shifting. And like, I was saying this to my friend the other day, like, is it easier to accept this when I'm not stammering as much? Because for me, I've got like I'll have a month where I'm not stammering as much, and a month where it just comes on, and it's just such a unique thing like that. It's just really unpredictable. Like that's what I found, and it's really interesting because it's like whenever I see depictions of stammering in the media, so like on TV or something, or like film, like I'm thinking of It by Stephen King. I've been reading the book, and it's like it shows that he stammers like on every word, or like every second word or something like that, and it's just like, no, like for us it's so different because I think the way that we stammer also just changes, and it does change at certain points, as you said, because you're going through a stressful period. It might have changed, like the way that you're actually stammering. I'm not sure, but yeah, for me that's definitely something that I've always thought. Oh gosh, it's changing again. And I think it's kind of just part of having a stammer, because my friend who I've met in the stammering community, she's also been telling me that in the last 6 months her stammer's changed a lot, and it's just something that we need to kind of keep adapting to. And I think that's why it can be such a hard thing, because we're just constantly having to adapt, and it almost feels new to us, because it's as I said, like it will come off and then go and then come on again, and it's such an interesting thing. But like for me, I found if I just fully accept it, as in like if I'm prepared to stammer, then when I do stammer, I'm like, okay, it's not my fault. I didn't make that situation awkward. It the other person made it awkward by either stopping the conversation or not keeping their eye contact or something like that. Like, but nothing I've done, should have affected that. I've got a stammer, and it's just the way that I talk, really.
Fantastic. Yeah, control the controllables. Which is whether we speak up, and say what we want, and how we feel about ourselves. And I mean, the fact is, at least the vast majority of us are absolutely not in control, right, of when we stutter and when we're not. So, and it's not as people that stutter, we are supposed to stutter, right? That's the condition, and that's the nature of it. And so it makes total sense not to beat ourselves up for that, and to have that sense that accepting the unpredictability, right? Because that's what I think you were getting at, the unpredictability, not knowing, hey, I'm going to a party tomorrow or a family get together, not knowing how the heck our stutter's going to be, right? That it's like I don't know how many, some people don't like to use this word, but I don't know how many disabilities are like that are so inconsistent. I'm sure some are, but this can be sort of night and day, right? If and a lot of times it can be impacted by who's listening, right? What's the social situation? So if it's your best friend in the world, maybe it's not there very much, but then you're, I don't know, 3 senior teachers walk into the room and are having small talk, and suddenly it's much more challenging, and that can be frustrating, and it can also sort of seduce us to think that it is our fault, because I can talk. My stuff works, right? I can talk, but then in that situation, I can't. What? I'm so close. Like, we tend to think we're probably so close to figuring it out. That's another thing that Joseph Sheehan used to talk about, that deep in our, well, once we get to a point of acceptance, hopefully not anymore, but deep in our, I don't know, subconscious or even conscious mind, is a feeling that maybe next Tuesday I'm going to wake up, it's all going to be gone. You know, like, I'm just going to figure it out, because we feel like we are capable of doing it, right? You take the people out of the room, and suddenly we don't have an issue. And we all know that that's largely true for us. It's not 100% true for everybody, but it's largely true for the vast majority of us. And that can be a guilt-inducing thing for us to know. But it's just, there's something there, you know? There's something in the neurology and the genetics and the, you know, whatever, you know, early experiences of speaking, who knows, that makes it so that that's just the way it is. Right? It is,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, it's exactly that. And like, it's like small tricks that I've noticed I do. Like, I'll start talking when the other person is finishing off what they say, because I know that if I'm talking at the same time as somebody else, I can talk. Like, it's really strange, but it's just like small things like that that I realize I'm doing without even noticing that much, you know. And I think, yeah, like exactly as you said, that's the interesting thing about stammering, that we sometimes can control it, and that things sometimes can work for us, and we don't stammer like in an empty room. And like, for me, I don't stammer as much at all if I'm talking to children, and that's why I love my job, because it feels like I've got a sense of freedom in the classroom. I can just kind of like relax a bit more, because that's like, you know, particularly the children I'm teaching now, they're 5 years old, and I'm just like, you know, talking really slowly to them because they're so young. And it just, I do feel a real sense of freedom in that. So yeah, it's just such an interesting thing. It really is.
For sure, for sure. I mean, it's endlessly fascinating, and but again, that accepting the, you know, sort of up and down nature of it, and just learning not to carry that moment. You know, obviously, you know, sometimes in the moment, I think all of us would rather that it rather the damn word come out of our mouth when we're trying to say it, you know, but not carrying it with us, right, afterwards. Like, oh God, such a screw up, you know, like all that stuff is really what, or so that's after the event, right? Or the anticipation. Oh, I got this meeting coming up on Wednesday, and God, I know I'm not right. So it's almost like stammering is a time machine condition for a lot of us, right? Where we anticipate it long before it happens a lot of times, and we bring it with us long after it happens. And that's where its real destructive power lies in our life. You know, I mean, yes, there are, you know, obvious inconveniences in the moment trying to get the word out, but the anticipation and the after feeling like doing horrible are a powerful part of the challenge. And I think that's where the acceptance really comes in. Accepting, yep, I'm going to stutter at that meeting on Wednesday. Yep, I stuttered at that meeting. Whatever, you know, enjoy my sandwich now, or enjoy my friend, or make my plans for the weekend, or whatever, you know.
Yeah, that's so true. And like, for me, like, I kind of, yeah, like, I do kind of treat every situation as one where I will probably stammer. And like, one thing I do like to do is, if I have had a big stammer and I feel like I've embarrassed myself, or I felt a bit like, yeah, you know, awkward or guilt for stammering, like, I've started doing just small things like gratitude journaling, or even doing like writing down 3 things that I still did wow in that conversation or in that day, and it can just be something like I carried on the conversation even though I stammered, or I retained eye contact, or just even things that I like about myself, like I am a smiley person, I'm friendly, just like random things like that that can help me to kind of to separate the stammer from my entire personality, because I feel like a lot of people feel that it can just swallow us up a bit, so I think it's really important to just reflect on the things that we're still doing well. And as we said before, like somebody who does something with a stammer, if it's a job or a talk or something, is so much more impressive than somebody else who also does that but doesn't stammer.
Yeah, I love that quote. Don't let stammering swallow up your entire personality, right? I think that is key to, yes, that's something that we do. That's a condition or a disability, speech impediment, whatever you want to call it, that we have. But it's not, that's not. I mean, that's who we are from a one aspect of ourselves standpoint, but it's not who we are in a deeper level. And it's not reflective on our self-worth as a human being. Okay, we're not going to win a speed talking contest. We'll grant you that, but life's not a speed talking contest. And and I feel like focusing on the communication and that yeah, I stammered there, but I still got my point across, right? Or I got my poke bowl or my hamburger or whatever you were trying to order or say at the restaurant. I got it. So point of opening my mouth to tell them what I wanted to eat was to get what I wanted to eat. And I got what I want. So mission accomplished, right? That was the point of speaking there, was to communicate, not to win a fluency contest. And again, and I think that smiling and I think that's a powerful thing. I don't know if you've ever had moments like that when you're in a stuttering moment, you sort of, like say you're talking like that, but you toss in a smile in the moment, with eye contact. It really cuts through the tension, both for us and for the listener. And yeah, so eye contact and a smile, and you can actually have these connections with people that are on a deeper level than what strangers you usually have. Waitress walks up, hey, what do you want? I'll take a hamburger and fries and a water. Okay, thanks. I'm having 20 minutes. Okay. They go here, like there's not much meaning in that interaction normally, right? But when we are having a moment and they have to pause and wait for us, and especially like, eye contact and smile, people actually, like, you have a human moment with people that's deeper that you would have had otherwise.
That's so true. That's really, yeah, that's such a great way to put it. And like, the challenges as well that you were talking about before, where you go into a shop and you tell the person that you stammer and you try to order something, or I think so. I've been doing like quite a few of those, just so like as I meet more stammerers, or we'll do things together, and that's something that I did with my friend who's part of the Maguire program. And exactly as you said, I felt that I was having like a deeper conversation with so many people, and I was actually kind of like giving them something to remember their day by, and kind of opening their eyes to something they didn't know much about. So yeah, I think it can actually be a really powerful thing.
That's awesome. yeah, have these deeper connections with people. And as you said, they're getting educated. They're meeting somebody that stammers, and probably they'll, when they encounter somebody, maybe 20 years from now, that stammers, they'll probably remember you. Right. Whereas normally you're not gonna, even if you had a 5-minute conversation with them with no stammering, oh, how's the weather? Good. I play sport, small talk stuff for 5 minutes. They probably won't remember you, a year from now, right? I mean, you're a memorable person, but just normal little quick interactions with people you don't necessarily remember. They're not memorable, right? They don't stick in your mind. And so, yeah, that's good stuff. And anybody watching, I mean, I think whether you're using a technique or not, doing these contact sessions where you go out and speak with a bunch of people and tell them that you stutter, huge fan of practicing eye contact, and really having those moments where you're with people. That's one of the things about eye contact. When you're having a stammering moment, but you're looking at people, and sometimes they'll look away, but fairly oftentimes they'll look back, at least some of the time. And you're not alone anymore in that moment, right? When we're looking away, sometimes it can feel super isolating. Like, I can't get this word out of my mouth. What are they thinking? Like, what's going on with this interaction, sort of thing. When as you're looking with people, you can see, okay, yeah, they're still with me. They're being patient, or whatever's going on. And if they're not being patient, if they're like, that initial look, because people just react sometimes before they think. So they're like what, they have a moment of just looking like, what the hell is going on here? But you see that also. And when they see you looking back, first of all, they figure it out quicker. Oh, he or she is still with me. I guess they've got a speech impediment. They're having a hard time speaking, but I think they're still talking to me. So let me just stick with them. So they figure it out faster. And they know you're looking at them. So they won't continue to go like that to your face. They'll be like, oh, speech impediment. Okay, let me just be respectful here, right? They get the message of what they're supposed to be doing faster when we convey, hey, still talking, we're still communicating, having a block here. We don't even have to say it. You can see it, but it's good to say it too. Yeah, I have a stutter, just so you know. Right? But that's awesome that you did that contact session. And did you feel like, well, how many of those sessions did you do? Was it one session with your friend that you did? Or?
Yeah, I've just done one, but it was quite recently, and we did quite a lot actually. I think about 20. She normally does 100, but for me 20 was like a lot. So yeah, and I felt really good, and it was in a week where I found small talk really difficult. So like I'm a supply teacher, so I go to a lot of different schools, and it can be hard to like constantly be introducing myself and talking about my stammer all the time. So that really helped. It almost like desensitized me to introducing myself. And then we also did things like going up to random people and just asking them if we could tell them about ourselves. And for me, I found that terrifying because they weren't even people who worked in a shop. It was just like random people sat on benches enjoying their Saturday, and I was like, oh my goodness, we're disturbing them. This is terrifying.
Right. But you were pleasantly surprised by how cool people were, right?
Yeah, I found that everyone was just so patient and just so interested in what we were doing, and it kind of gave me the confidence to talk more about it at work. Like I found that because I know that people are actually interested and kind of sensitive to stammering. I feel like I feel a lot better now, like about stammering more openly.
Yeah, that's awesome. And again, that's what was done for me when I was 18. Remember, they brought me around campus and had me talk to people, and yeah, so I would encourage you and anybody listening. This is powerful stuff to do this. And I have a peer mentorship program where we do just this. We do it over Zoom, so I'll be on my phone in New York and, in Coventry or New Delhi or Sydney or wherever they are, in the world, as long as it's not 3 a.m. in the morning. And we just go out and, and we talk to people and we practice the eye contact. We tell them we stutter. And every person that does that, first of all, everybody pretty much, unless they've done it before, is pretty freaked out. And a lot of people run away when I tell them that we're going to do this. They're like, okay, I'll let you know, But everybody that does it, it's universal. People are like, so much cooler than I thought they were going to be. And I actually am free to go out and stutter in the world. It is okay. It is not the end of civilization. And that is a revelation and a revolution, I think, for people to realize that. And, but again, there's another quote from Joseph Sheehan: we're changed by what we do oftentimes in life, right? And the action can lead the thinking. So we can sit there in our room and tell ourselves all day, oh yeah, if people can watch this podcast conversation, say, okay, yeah, I'm sure, they're probably right. It's okay. But your brain doesn't get the message on a deeper level until you do it and experience it yourself, right?
That's so true. Yeah. Like I found that the more I talk about it and the more like I stammer openly and keep eye contact and talk to people that I wouldn't normally talk to, like that's when it kind of becomes something that's less of a thing for me.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Well, we're coming to the end of the chat here. It's been an awesome conversation. I could keep going for sure, but only so many hours in the day. But so are there any things that we didn't speak about that you'd like to touch on before we wrap up?
I think we've actually covered quite a lot. Yeah, just really that again, like, it'd be really great. I think like the most important thing for us is like if we saw more people who stammered in the media. I felt like if I saw someone who sounded like me when I was young, I felt like I would have grown up thinking very differently about it, thinking it was that it was an acceptable way of talking. But because I didn't see that, then I kind of was always really embarrassed about it. So yeah, I think that's where the future is, really.
I agree, and I would just add that for that to happen, some people that stutter need to go for that, right? Need to call up their local news station and say, hey, are you interested in interviewing me? Because there's not enough awareness for this, right? Like take that step to put themselves out there, because if people don't put themselves out there, then nobody will be out there.
That is such a great way of putting it. Yeah, exactly that.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed the chat, Bhupinder, and let's stay in touch and have a good one. I know it's 5 hours later in the UK than it is here in New York, but have a good evening, and we'll talk to you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for inviting me onto your podcast. It's been such a great experience. It's taught me a lot. So thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. Take care.